In April 2023, we would get the release of Jujutsu Kaisen Chapter 221 and by proxy, the announcement of the battle that the entire anime community had been waiting for since Jujutsu Kaisen would first release its anime. Gojo vs Sukuna. These two would have their initial match at the beginning of the story, displaying Gojo's dominance and reinforcing his statement of being the strongest sorcerer around, only for Sukuna to shortly after make the promise of eradicating Gojo once regaining his full strength. And although none of us knew how strong these two truly were at these points of the story, we knew and would come to learn a few things. First, we knew that at some point we were going to get a battle between these two for certain. And second, we would come to learn of how strong these two are compared to everybody else as the story would go on, and that honestly, only one could stop the other, further cementing the hype for this eventual battle to come. The battle of the strongest sorcerers to ever exist would eventually happen in the story, with it taking over 3 months of back and forth between the two characters in real world time for it to finally conclude, ending with Gojo managing to bring Sukuna to near death, only for Sukuna to learn the world-cutting slash and take Gojo's life before he realized it was even lost, leaving Sukuna as the victor of the battle. Despite the battle being as close as it was with a definitive victor, for some reason, people to this day still debate this matchup. So in this video, I intend to only reinforce the conclusion of the fight by going through certain parts of the fight, the narrative, and whatever else reasoning that I have as of now. With that said, this intro's dragged on long enough, so let's just get into the video. I think before anything else, it's imperative for us to understand what a Jujutsu sorcerer is, so we can understand the context of Jujutsu sorcery and the battles contained within it a lot better. I want to start off with this, as some of the most common arguments for Gojo's loss against Sukuna being excused ignores what it means to be an actual Jujutsu sorcerer. When reading through the story, you see that there are many things that kind of tell us straight up what it means to be a Jujutsu sorcerer, and like how battles in Jujutsu Kaisen are not supposed to be anything like the traditional battles we would see in other stories. As Reggie Starr said it best, sorcerers are nothing but con artists, and we would see the pinnacle of sorcery through Sukuna, as he would cheese the system through his ability to abuse the pros and cons of binding vows, and he was so good at cheesing and abusing this power system that he was able to eventually break the rules of the world itself through generating the world-cutting slash. Jujutsu and Jujutsu battles were never, ever supposed to be fair. And really, this setting only benefits those who are willing to abuse its power system and basically do anything to win. This willingness to abuse the system and do things you should not, while managing to be so good at it that you don't go too far, is nothing but pure skill. And it's why Sukuna and Kenjaku are stated to be monsters in the narrative of the story multiple times. And even Gojo does this same thing of breaking the power system and taking it beyond what it normally is, but in a different way, as he uses his abilities to skew his chances of landing a black flash higher than others. You are supposed to be unfair and find every way you can be unfair. This even translates into the conclusions of almost every battle in the series, as usually someone wins in Jujutsu Kaisen due to making some sort of underhanded play that the opponent could not predict. For example, the conclusion to Megumi versus Reggie, in which Megumi would engage in close quarters combat pretending like he had no more Shikigami or cards to play, only to actually engage in battle and then hide the wolf out until the very end, claiming that it had never died in the first place, which is what makes Reggie says all sorcerers are con artists anyway, and it is like the best moment in the series to display this. There's also the moment in which Nobara would finally return in the final battle of the series against Sukuna, doing a sneak attack on him by using resonance on a long lost finger that Gojo hit a while ago. Her doing this after being missing for so long and being believed to be dead by Yuji made her a factor that Sukuna would never consider, which is what allowed Yuji to finally gain the edge on him and put him down for good. Even when Gojo would battle against Toji in their final round, this being the undisputed top 5 fights in the series, he would explain that Toji could know about his techniques of red and blue due to being from the Zenin clan, sure, but there is no way that anybody outside of the Gojo clan would know about purple. And Gojo stated this in order to tell us exactly why he decided to use it in their final clash, because Toji had no idea it even existed, and thus could not counter the technique, and it blew a hole through him before he could even realize it was being used. Funnily enough, this is similar how Gojo went out against Sukuna. I say all this to say, battles of sorcery were never fair. People also just misread or did not understand how binding vows work, because breaking a self-imposed binding vow was never, ever stated to have the same consequences as breaking a binding vow made between two people. I wanted to establish this as a point due to two reasons that people typically reject Sukuna's triumph over Gojo. One reason being the use of his Shikigami, and the other reason being how Sukuna just kind of whipped out the world-cutting slash at the very end. I'll address the former first. Usually when discussing Gojo versus Sukuna, people will say it was a 3v1 past a certain point due to the inclusion of the Shikigami generated from Megumi's 10 Shadows technique. Some may say this as a joke, but others genuinely believe this to be a reason why, like, Sukuna won unfairly. First and foremost, the 10 Shadows are Shikigami, familiars of whomever they're attached to. They serve as an ability as much as Gojo's Infinity does, and just because the technique results in summoning beasts with some autonomy, it doesn't automatically make any fight into a 2v1, a 3v1, anything like that. To me, that's like saying Gojo only wins his fights because he has the most powerful technique combined with being the eyes that gives him the ability to use that technique, right? The 6 eyes. It's a part of his arsenal, his character, and what he's got. If he doesn't have that, he is not Gojo. Another thing is, the Shikigami are still a part of Sukuna's kit in this battle. And keep in mind, he couldn't even really like use them to their full capabilities because he had to babysit them the entire time, or use them in ways where if Gojo defeated them, they would not be gone for good. He had to like use them at half summonings or merge them together. He could not use the 10 Shadows to its full capability anyway. Gojo's strength alone did put Sukuna into a decent handicap when utilizing the Shikigami because of this, and the same could not be said about Gojo, who just got to flip around and have a blast for majority of the fight, up until he realized what Sukuna was trying to do the entire time. Sukuna using his Shikigami should just not be considered to be an unfair advantage in any way. Nobody ever said Megumi lost a 100v1 against Toji with all those rabbits, and the entire fandom will sit there and tell you that Yuta soloed the Sendai colony, although Rika was present for 95% of it. And it doesn't even matter if the 10 Shadows was Sukuna's or not, because again, this is Jujutsu sorcery we're talking about. The more rules you break, the better of a sorcerer you are. Sukuna using Shikigami is the same exact thing as anybody else using Shikigami, and you cannot use any argument besides your own emotion to prove otherwise if you disagree. Another point I wanted to address about this fight is how people reason it as one with a BS conclusion due to the nature of said conclusion. From the outside, it does seem as if Gojo constantly had an edge over Sukuna, unleashing mass devastation on Tokyo as he endlessly chased Sukuna down in an attempt to overwhelm and corner him. But what isn't ever either understood or addressed when this argument is used is the fact that this was a part of Sukuna's plan somewhat. As Sukuna states at the very beginning of their battle, he was going to peel off Gojo's scales. As Angel states a few chapters after, if Sukuna manages to understand and bypass the Limitless, this battle is over. As Gojo picks up on Maharaga's wheel being used, he begins to rush the battle. Why is this? Why, despite Gojo's overwhelming performance over Sukuna for the entire battle, does the entire cast of our heroes still worry so much about Gojo throughout the fight? Because Sukuna was adapting to Gojo's attacks. Sukuna had to strategically sandbag most of the fight in order to have Maharaga provide him with the information required to generate the world cutting slash on his own and cut Gojo down. It sounds crazy to say this, but Sukuna being beat up was all a part of the plan, and you can tell as he meticulously smiles and laughs his ass off throughout the majority of the fight despite being on the back foot. The world cutting slash was the goal the entire time, and funnily enough, the characters in the story constantly communicate this to the reader as the battle continues. Simply put here, the world cutting slash was not BS, wasn't an ass pull, wasn't anything like that. It was the natural conclusion of not defeating Sukuna before he understood his opponent. If you examine every one of Sukuna's fights, you'll see that sandbagging and playing passive to understand his opponents before acting, even before obtaining the 10 Shadows, was a strategy that he would always employ, whether he really needed it or not. So really, not a single part of Sukuna's victory here was an ass pull. It's important to understand that the fight went the way it did because Sukuna wanted to bypass Gojo's Infinity, and it's implied from wanting to quote unquote peel his scales. That creating a technique that can do that was also one of his goals in this final confrontation against Gojo. Again, Sukuna had to be on the back foot for this strategy to even work, but even then, Gojo outright says, maybe he could have beaten me without the 10 Shadows. Gojo suggesting that there was even a chance that Sukuna could have defeated him with no 10 Shadows does just also outright confirm that Sukuna does not need the 10 Shadows to beat Gojo. If he needed it to win, Gojo would have never stated this, and this would have never been put in the story. We don't know how he would do it besides domain clashing more strategically without the intention of sandbagging so the wheel can adapt and all that, but Gojo said it, and there's really nothing besides the absence of evidence that denies this statement. There's also Gojo outright stating that Sukuna did not get to use everything he had in their final battle, which could be used as evidence arguments for their previous statement, but it is also an absolute fact. You cannot deny this, and I'm not sure why some still choose to. We saw what Sukuna was capable of like 2 chapters after the conclusion of their fight. Moving on from the initial first 2 points, I also want to point out the community's unwillingness to come to a consensus on how we judge certain things throughout the story. On one hand, you're constantly crucified and mocked for even suggesting any kind of what-if scenario with Megumi involved, and Megumi, despite all of his nuances and being reduced to a laughingstock due to what he dealt with in the story. But I bring this up as usually the joke revolves around the word if. Most of Megumi's discussions begins with the word if, and it is funny that it's come to a point where it's an entire meme. And although it's funny, we still gotta be fair here, because a lot of these alternate ways for Gojo to win usually start with the word if too. We can't pick and choose here because people have been holding on to these cope beliefs of Gojo somehow being stronger than Sukuna despite losing almost like 3 years ago now, and we still somehow can't provide a definitive 100% surefire way Gojo could have defeated Sukuna. It's always like some misquoted Gege quote that somehow revolves around the made-up scenario of Gojo dodging the world-cutting slash and winning the fight only because he did that. Now, circling back to the 3 versus 1 thing too, people love to say that if Sukuna never jumped Gojo, he wouldn't have won. You do understand that this battle literally begins with Gojo launching a 200% hollow purple with the help of 3 people, one of which had the job of planting down a curtain so Sukuna wouldn't even be able to see and prepare for the attack coming. You cannot convince me that this strategy isn't more dishonorable than anything Sukuna did in that entire fight. Even then, Gojo does that entire thing for Gege to remind us that these 2 are Jujutsu sorcerers. They are not gladiators. Being sneaky like that is a fundamental part of the game. So although there's nothing wrong with what Gojo did from my perspective, I say that to say, if we're going to be talking about honor and making arguments like that in order to discredit Sukuna's win, just remember how this entire fight starts. There's also just the structure of the story of Jujutsu Kaisen and how all of that was going to go. Sukuna and Yuji had to have a confrontation at some point. There was no way they had that battle in 214 and then Gojo was just going to come in, seal the deal, and save everybody. Wouldn't have made any sense. I do get how people can see and think this as well, but come to the opposite conclusion of saying, well, this is why Gojo lost because Sukuna had to move the plot forward. But it's also like, that's why Sukuna had to be stronger than Gojo too. The story made Sukuna stronger than Gojo, and so he was. It's kind of that simple. If you read Jujutsu Kaisen for the themes and nuances and all that too, you kind of knew that Gojo and Kashimo were going to lose their battles against Sukuna because in the end, they were no more than just another set of challengers in the line of facing the strongest. Yes, Gojo and Kashimo were a bit different from the rest in their own ways, as simply put. Gojo believed the strength that he and Sukuna had were empty without others in their lives, and Kashimo came to truly understand Sukuna's path as the strongest, but he accepted that it was empty and pointless and probably even a mistake. Despite these things, there was only one person who was getting stronger without being selfish, one who was being uplifted by not only himself but the love, twisted or not, of everyone else around him, and this was Yuji Itadori. And only that kind of strength can overcome a selfish man with nothing left to lose. Narratively speaking, Gojo never had a chance, and the story told you Sukuna's win condition as soon as the battle started. And a couple of times throughout the battle, and funnily enough, when you reread the fight and really examine Sukuna, you see that exact win condition was all he was gunning for the entire time, nothing else. With that said, I wanted to go ahead and readdress this topic. As usually, I would circle around to rereading the fight on a stream every 8 months or so, just so we can talk about it and debate there. But if you guys haven't noticed, I don't really care to stream like that anymore, so this was a good alternative. I do believe that after like 2 to 3 years of this topic, it needs to be let go, and really, people just need to accept that Sukuna won that fight fair and square in the metrics of Jujutsu sorcery. Gojo even admitted himself that Sukuna was superior in their battle, and the list goes on. There's too much irrefutable evidence skewing towards Sukuna that displays that he was truly the strongest sorcerer in the history of Jujutsu as of their battle, and I don't know why the Gojo fans just can't let him be happy with his defeat. It's even in character for Gojo to be satisfied with how things played out, as he even said that he's grateful he didn't die some boring death where he just withered away from old age and got to go all out one last time, giving it everything that he's got. As someone who's made many analysis videos on Gojo's character alone, I've come to genuinely believe that you can really only understand the character if you accept that he lost against Sukuna while understanding that he defeated Sukuna in the exact way that he wanted to, which was weakening Sukuna enough to allow the next generation of sorcerers to defeat him and stand on their own, which he succeeded in with flying colors. Despite Gojo winning in the grand scheme of things, Sukuna was still the more powerful and superior sorcerer. With that said, if you enjoyed this video or topic, don't forget to leave a like or subscribe in order to really help the channel out, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.